Hello everyone, DonTheCrown here with a leveling guide for the Bone Spear Necromancer. I played this build extensively in the beta, and I've done a lot of theory crafting and tinkering with it since, and this build was so incredibly strong that all you really needed was the legendary aspect, which you can get out of the codex, and besides having that and a generator, you pretty much didn't really need anything else to absolutely just tear through content. And I have a feeling that this is not going to change at all, leading all the way up through World Tier 1 and 2, finish that capstone dungeon going into World Tier 3, and even completing World Tier 3. This just did so much stinking damage, and I just want to give you my take. Yes, I know that there's other people out there that cover this particular type of build, but this is kind of how I think the build is going to work really well. So the very first thing to note is that all of the aspects that I have here are aspects that you can get out of the codex. There are some things that are particularly good and strong for this build, and if you happen to get them, that you should probably use them. But these are all things you get out of the codex and you can easily farm, and this should kind of be like what your build will look like if you have really no luck at all going into the capstone into World Tier 3. Now I also have added a Paragon board stuff here so you can kind of see like how it would proceed through World Tier 3, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So the thing that makes the whole build run is splintering aspect. Now this isn't necessarily necessary for the build, but once you get this and you get this in Act 3 in the dry steppes, you have to proceed the campaign along to unlock the dungeon that this unlocks. And I'm sure that means like after you complete some sort of dungeon for the main storyline, that a dungeon will probably pop up exactly in the same spot or very close to it that you'll be able to run for this aspect. And as soon as it's available, you should run it immediately because this aspect is probably the strongest leveling aspect in the entire game right now. And what this does, it makes it so that Bone Spear's primary attack makes enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable for 1.5 to 2.5 seconds, and those bone shards from Bone Spear deal bonus damage to vulnerable enemies. And the really ridiculous thing is, this actually makes the first enemy hit vulnerable as well. I did test this in beta, and I had somebody who had this aspect in Server Slam tell me that this is how it still works. And yeah, this is very, very strong. Now you notice that we've thrown this on the amulet. You get 50% more power here. Don't throw aspects on your weapons while you're leveling because it's going to be way more difficult to level with. For the rest of the aspects, we have some interesting things here. The aspect of Potent Blood makes it so that if you get blood orbs that heal you past your full health, you're going to gain essence. We're going to be using Hemorrhage as like a is a generator, but it's not really our generator, but I'll get into this. But if you have to use it, it'll give you blood orbs occasionally, which can heal you up, which is really good for boss fights, or it'll heal up your essence, which is also really good just for clearing. We're also using aspect of Grasping Veins. I know a lot of people don't really like Corpse Tendrils because it like feels a little bit slow, but Corpse Tendrils does some really great things for the Bone Spear build. Most importantly is it helps group enemies, even if it's kind of on a delay. Because one of the worst things about Bone Spear is when you throw out the Bone Spear and it like you're hitting a single target and a cone behind them and like it kind of comes back and hits some stuff. It really sucks when there's like an enemy standing directly next to them. You have to like rotate around them and line up your shot so you happen to hit both of them at the exact same time. It's just really a big pain in the butt and not something you necessarily want to do. And so Grasping Veins can help suck all the enemies onto one spot so you can just eliminate all of them, and it's really good. Everything else here is like Aspect of Might I think is okay. We're probably not going to be using our left click all that much. With Aspect of Disobedience you get armor, which is always good. Aspect of Protector I think is just no brainer, especially while you're leveling. You get this really easily in Fractured Peaks. And then Wind Striker's aspect, we're getting some movement speed where, you know, you'll be critting a whole ton with Bone Spear, and this will just give us movement speed a lot of the time. We're also going to be using Edge Master's aspect. This gives us increased damage based off our available primary resource when we cast. With Bone Spear, you kind of would be casting at high essence because you get other multiplier bonuses from bone skills, and that's pretty much how that works. For primary skills, we're using Bone Spear, obviously. Hemorrhage is like our left click. We have Decrepify. This is really good for keeping yourself and your skeletons alive. It just reduces the damage the enemies do, and especially if you're playing with a group, they're going to love you for having this because it just makes everything easier. Next up, we're using Corpse Explosion. Corpse Explosion is absolutely ridiculous. It is absolutely busted. Even if it didn't do very much damage, this consumed corpses, which basically turns it into our #1 generator by a large margin. Then we're going to be using Corpse Tendrils to group enemies up. And then lastly, we are using Skeletons to give ourselves Reapers with the chance to carve flesh off enemies to form a corpse. And this is really, really strong because having these guys hit the boss or hitting enemies will just generate corpses for you automatically, which you can use to, well, keep the skeletons alive. And you can be using them to pop off Corpse Explosion or Corpse Tendrils for like crowd control and just grouping enemies. Now I know you may be thinking, oh man, but skeletons die so much. I mean, personally in my testing, they weren't dying all that much. Yes, they aren't like super duper unkillable strong, but as long as you're kind of like taking care of them and killing stuff, they should be fine. If you're really worried about it, you can just throw in a shield. It actually does increase their tankiness, and shields give you a multiplier to your main hand's damage. So if you don't want to keep replacing the offhand focus, you can just wear a shield instead, and you can even throw a defensive aspect on that, and you probably won't have to upgrade your shield because it's just a flat increase to your main hand, like 80% increased damage. You do lose a little bit of damage for the tankiness, but you're going to be tankier and your skeletons are going to be tankier. It's a good thing to do. Now we're going to go through the skill tree here, but I'm going to go through and do it point by point here so you know exactly how to level up. So the very first thing that we're going to do here, I just clicked the wrong spot, is we're going to take points in hemorrhage, and then we're going to go take enhanced hemorrhage. This makes it so that we have a 20% chance to form a blood orb. Blood orbs are pretty good, and this is a pretty decent single target generator. And this second one makes it so that when you pick up a blood orb, it deals extra damage to enemies around your target, and you get extra essence for every enemy you hit. Now, I know that the Bone Splinters is pretty popular here. The problem is that it doesn't really do a ton of damage, and you have to invest 3 points into it to get crit. If you really want the crit and you don't really like dealing with the blood orbs and the extra healing, you can definitely go and get this instead. But I kind of like having the extra blood orbs. I think that they are good. Next, we're going to come down here. Obviously, we're going to take Bone Spear, Enhanced Bone Spear, and then Supernatural Bone Spear. Now, you only need to keep this node until you get the aspect for Bone Spear, and then you can just switch this out to Paranormal Bone Spear. So as soon as you get the aspect, just switch it over. It's going to give you 5% more crit, which is really nice. But more importantly, whenever that primary Bone Spear crits, it's going to shoot out 2 additional bone shards, and that can do quite a bit of damage. Especially if you are throwing the Bone Spear so that it is like impacting a wall, like almost directly behind your target. All of those shards are going to come back and just shotgun and hit the enemy. And it's a lot of damage. It's really, really good. Next up, after that, we're going to put another point into Bone Spear, and this is going to unlock the next section down here. And we just pick up 1 point in Corpse Explosion, and then we are going to take 3 points in Grim Harvest. And Grim Harvest is absolutely bonkers, kind of silly just overall, because this makes the entire playstyle really start to take off. Grim Harvest is insane. Consuming a corpse generates 9 essence. If we go back up here, we can see that, hey, this is generating 8 essence. This is generating 6 essence, so even less essence, 7, 4 essence per enemy hit. So this basically has just become our best essence generator. And all you need to do is pop corpses, which is doing damage. So it's 50% damage to nearby enemies. So it's AoE versus 25%. So it does more damage than our generator. It does it in an AoE, and it gives us more essence. What's not to love? This is definitely hands down the best thing to do next. And you'll be able to be generating corpses from these Reapers, or just from killing things. You just throw out a Bone Spear, 1 or 2 things die, just blow up all the corpses, and you'll end the fight at full HP, which is not full HP, but full essence, which is a really good thing. Next up, we're just going to put 3 points into Bone Spear. It's really important when you're playing basically any leveling build that you get 5 points into your core skill pretty quickly. We only really took a detour down here because we want to generate more essence, and really like the limiting factor for your DPS ends up being how much resource you have. So getting better resource generation also is helping your Bone Spear DPS, but getting full 5 ranks is also pretty important. Next up, after that, we are going to go and get Enhanced Corpse Explosion. So Enhanced Corpse Explosion is going to make the AoE a little bit bigger for this particular use of Corpse Explosion. Corpse Explosion is definitely doing some damage. It's not like doing nothing. It was doing more before, but it's still very, very good and noticeable, and it's super fast. That's something to mention. Corpse Explosion is so fast. Same with just like resummoning or healing your skeletons. They're very, very, very fast casts. Probably faster than any basic attack for sure. Next up, we're going to put 2 points into Hewed Flesh. This helps you generate some additional corpses. Now you might look at this and be like, oh man, 8% chance? Like that's never going to proc, dude. But Bone Spear is actually like the best lucky hit skill that Necromancer has a 50% chance to proc, which means each hit with Bone Spear, not just the primary, but also the small shards, are going to have a total of 4% chance to proc, which when you're throwing a Bone Spear into a large pack of enemies, they're going to be dropping corpses from Hewed Flesh. They're going to be dropping their own corpse because you're going to be annihilating them. And it's just a lot of corpses. And each corpse that hits the ground is a free, quick, and easy 9 essence that you can go and get. After that, we are going to go and put 1 point down here in Corpse Tendrils. Once again, this just pulls enemies in. It stuns them. It allows you to hit multiple enemies really, really easy with your Bone Spear. It is a little bit slow, admittedly, but this doesn't consume the corpse, so you can pull them in, explode the corpse, throw the spear. It feels great, and we'll eventually get the aspect here from Kazakhstan here, aspect of Grasping Veins, which makes it so you get 10% critical strike chance for 6 seconds when you cast Corpse Tendril, not when it like pops off, so you don't even have to wait, and it gives you 30% bonus critical strike damage, which is also really, really great. Next up after that, we have Serration. Serration is insane. Your bone skills have increased critical strike chance for each 10 essence you have. With 3 points, this is giving you 1.5% crit per 10 essence. And so if you're at full essence, that's 15% crit. Whew. This is one of my favorite nodes for sure. And then we're going to put 1 point in Compound Fracture, and then 3 points in Avulsion. This makes it so that bone skills deal increased critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. Basically, everything you're hitting with your Bone Spear is going to be vulnerable because it just applies it. And so you're dealing increased critical strike damage. More crits, more crit damage, really, really good. And then next, we're going to pop back up and grab Decrepify. Decrepify curses and enemies in an area. It slows them, makes them like less likely to come and murderize you or your skeletons or your party, and makes them also do less damage, which just makes everybody tankier that's around you. This is good. You don't really need to spam this, but maybe when you're going to like a scary situation where there's a lot of enemies, you can throw this down and then start throwing those bone spears, blowing up those corpses, and you're going to be just fine. Next up, you can go and choose between Skeletal Warrior Mastery or Fueled by Death. And you can pretty much choose if you need more damage or you feel like your skeletons are staying alive. You can go Fueled by Death and get increased damage for 6 seconds after consuming a corpse, up to 9%. Or you can go and increase the damage and life of your Skeletal Warriors by 45%. And it's going to make them a lot more tanky. And that heal, like when you pop the Skeletal Priest, is going to heal them for a percentage of their life, and you've just increased their life. So that is a very good thing to do as well. And then we are going to go and pick up Plagued Corpse Explosion. Now I know some people have been talking about doing Blighted Corpse Explosion and potentially pairing that with Reaper's Pursuit for more movement speed, but personally I really like the damage that Corpse Explosion does, and I don't really feel like this does damage in a reasonable amount of time, and so I don't like this. If you like it, by all means, go for it. The movement speed is probably pretty nice as well. But this makes it so you do increased damage to enemies that are slowed, stunned, or vulnerable. Well, we are going to be making enemies vulnerable just from hitting them with Bone Spear, and then we are slowing them or stunning them from just using Corpse Tendrils. Eventually, if we want to pull them in and slow them as well, they're just basically going to get all of these modifiers, and this says explicitly that these damage bonuses can stack. So you can get multiple modifiers here, which is a lot more damage. Next up after that, this should unlock... we have to put a couple of points here into Corpse Explosion. I believe we're going to max it out here. Now if you choose to instead take Blighted Corpse Explosion, leave 3 points out and go put them here in Reaper's Pursuit. But I'm not doing that, so I'm going to put all of my points into Corpse Explosion, level it up, and then we have access to Ossified Essence. This is a great node because this makes it so that your bone skills deal increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50% upon cast, and that X in front of the 1% is basically means that this is more. It multiplies all of the damage that you're doing before. So if you're at 100%, if you're 100 essence, 100% full, all the way full, that's 50% more damage. It's a big multiplier. It's gonna be really noticeable. This is another reason why the Corpse Explosion feels so good, is because this will constantly be filling up your essence and keeping you being able to cast Bone Spear at full essence or close to it. Next up, Unliving Energy and Perfect Balance, or Imperfectly Balanced. Unliving Energy basically increases your maximum essence, which in turn increases the amount of damage you're doing because of this and because of this. And so just highly recommend picking this up. And then Imperfectly Balanced is increasing the cost of your core skills, but it makes them do more damage. And so 15% more damage is a good thing. Next up, we finish up Hewed Flesh. This makes us just drop more corpses. Now it's basically 6% chance with Bone Spear in order to drop corpses, which is a good thing as well. Then I recommend going and either finishing out that Skeletal Warrior Mastery or Fueled by Death, whichever one you didn't choose before. You can just finish them out. And then we're going to come down here to this area and basically grab almost everything. I recommend taking Death's Embrace. This is going to make it so that when you are fighting enemies that are right on top of you, you are going to do more damage to them and they're going to do less damage to you, which is very nice. If enemies get close, you don't want them hitting you and doing as much damage, and doing more damage to them is a good thing. Likewise, you should mostly be at range. Like, Necromancer is not a tanky class at all. There's almost no reason to get into melee range, and I really recommend staying at distance, and so this will increase the amount of damage you do to most of the enemies you should be fighting. And then Amplify Damage also increases your damage against everything you curse, which means now when you apply this crowd control to enemies, it is also a damage multiplier, so you can feel better about using it, and you're not like not doing damage type of thing. Finally, we're going to go over here with Compound Fracture, put these last 2 points in here. This makes it so that after critically striking 10 times with bone skills, your bone skills deal increased damage for 5 seconds. By this point, you should probably have some crit on your gear. You'd be critting a lot and keeping this buff up pretty common. And then the last things I would recommend is probably going and putting point here in Enhanced Corpse Tendrils. This makes it so that enemies that are within range of the tendrils are slowed before they're pulled in, so they're less likely to get out of the range. And then they have a chance to drop blood orbs when damaging enemies, which just makes it so that you're going to get a ton of blood orbs while you're going around and killing packs. This might even be something you might want to pick up earlier than this, simply because it just gives you so many blood orbs. And if you're really enjoying the aspect here of Potent Blood, giving you essence for your blood orbs, that's a really solid combination. And then the last thing, just throw one more point in here, just lowers the cooldown. Of course, you could throw this point into like Decrepify instead to increase the effectiveness of that, but you know, it's really up to you. And that's pretty much it for the general build. I'm going to go and talk about stats on gear real quick, and then we're going to get into the Paragon. So first things I really recommend to keep your eyes out for is movement speed. Movement speed comes on your amulet or on your boots. Very, very important things to get. You don't have any movement skill, and it's just kind of sucks on Necromancer. One thing that's just kind of unfortunate with just how Necromancer is. And yeah, it's just movement speed is going to be a really big deal for you. After that, for damage stuff, like damage to vulnerable, core skill damage, damage just generic, physical damage, and bone skill damage, all of that stuff is just things that you should look for on your weapon. Crit chance, crit damage are all really good. We have the plus ranks to bone or corpse skills. One thing to note is that although this is called, I think it's like called the Macabre tree here, getting plus to Macabre actually doesn't increase corpse explosion. It only increases blood mist, bone prison, and oddly enough, bone spirit, whereas getting plus to corpse skills will affect corpse explosion and corpse tendrils. So getting plus Macabre is not really going to help you out, besides maybe giving you a value point in blood mist that you can swap in if you really feel like you need to do that. Another thing to keep in mind is resource cost reduction. So if you have like anything that reduces your essence cost or increases your maximum essence, this is very good for the build because it just lets you cast more stuff and do more damage when you do cast. And lastly, obviously, life is a very good stat. Highly recommend that. Next up, let's talk about Paragon. So Paragon is something that I think a lot of people are maybe doing things a little bit differently than what I'm doing here, but my core philosophy here is this build should be able to take you all the way through World Tier 3, and about that point, I'm not necessarily 100% sure that you're going to have the specific glyphs that you want, but you should be able to maybe have some glyphs, but it's unlikely you're going to level them up and have them be the maximum size because glyphs only go out this far when you are first getting them. They're not going all the way out. And so I'm not trying to like activate them by going too far. But these are the glyphs that I felt were the best for if I was going to pick anything. The very first thing is enemies affected by curse skills take increased damage from you and your minions. This is actually another X multiplier, and 10% just more damage is really, really good. And this will eventually increase the effectiveness of these nodes here in range. So like more damage eventually. That's pretty good. We're going to go up the tree here and we're going to the bone graft board. This is like, I think the only bone board on the entire Paragon tree right now for some reason. And we are going to put the essence glyph over here. This makes it so that critical strikes deal increased damage to enemies that are not healthy. And then for every 5 dexterity purchased within range, core skills get increased critical strike damage. And this scales up to an absolutely absurd amount of critical strike damage. If you're not sure to know how to figure that out, we do have the mega doc for all of the glyph stuff. I'll put this in the description below. All you have to do is go here to the glyph part. We'll go down to Necromancer in particular, and it's right here. So it's going to scale up to, I believe, 19.2% critical strike damage per 5 dexterity, which when put on the very best board would be 172% critical strike multi, but that's at max level. So this glyph is absolutely bonkers. And I can even go and look at like, hey, what are the best boards for this? Oh, Bone Graft. Sounds familiar. So that is a really good glyph and board combination. Possibly the best glyph and board combination for Bone Necromancer. And then I recommend coming up through the side here, picking up this Maximum Essence. There's also Essence on Kill. This is just going to help you not need to worry about resources so much. And then get critical strike damage with bone, and then eventually work your way all the way out to Bone Graft, which is hitting enemies with bone skills increases your damage by 1% and your maximum essence by 3 for 8 seconds. And this stacks up as you hit more frequently. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the build. Now, one thing that you might be wondering is, What do I spend my obols on while I'm leveling? Is there anything in particular that I want to gamble for? And what I'd recommend gambling for is rings, because there is one aspect in rings that is absolutely busted. And that's this one. Aspect of exposed flesh. You have up to a 10% chance to generate 30 to 50 essence when hitting a vulnerable enemy with your bone skills. Well, Bone Spear has a 50% multiplier, so this is up to a 5% chance to generate enough to cast another Bone Spear. So you can just read this as 5% chance to completely refund your skill. And since you're hitting multiple times and maybe multiple enemies, this is unethical. It is really just way too strong, probably. This, I think, probably an endgame is going to be the type of thing where you're just literally chain casting Bone Spear, because it's just that good. There's just, yeah, it's just really, really insane. Absolutely nuts. And I don't really know what you do with that. Now, if you do get to the point there where you are basically never needing to use your left click, and you might not ever need to use your left click once you get the corpse stuff going, especially if you're in a party and your skeletons aren't like having any sort of hard time, you could potentially unsacrifice your golem and bring it back, or put blood mist in here to give yourself a little survivability. You really can just flex a couple of different things. I recommend sacrificing the cold skelly mages here for increased damage to vulnerable enemies. As you're getting started, having the cold skelly mages giving you 2 essence on hit, this could be very, very powerful for helping you kind of get that essence machine rolling. And of course, we're going to be using the Reapers with the chance to generate a corpse. Overall, this is my take on the build. There'll definitely be several others. Bone Spear is going to be an extremely popular skill to level with, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful time in Sanctuary, and we'll see you soon. Come by the stream.